Grand monuments stand as silent witnesses to forgotten lives. This is the hidden world inside the royal walls, a story not of kings, but of the workers who built empires. You will learn the 10 astonishing secrets these laborers left behind, from coded messages in stone to acts of silent rebellion. How did thousands of people vanish from history after creating its most enduring symbols? And what whispers did they leave buried in the mortar for us to find? What does it truly cost to build a civilization meant to last forever? Every empire began with a command, a grand vision etched into the mind of a single ruler. But that vision was given substance and form by the calloused hands of an army of laborers. This is the fundamental, often overlooked equation of power. The pharaoh, gazing upon the desert horizon, did not see a pyramid. He saw a statement of his own divinity, a mountain of stone pointing to the heavens. To make it real required the coordinated effort of tens of thousands. Farmers, during the Nile's annual flood when their fields were submerged, became quarrymen, haulers, and masons. This was not a project, it was a seasonal redirection of an entire society's energy. Similarly, a Roman emperor commissioning a new aqueduct was not just ordering a water supply. He was demonstrating his empire's logistical genius, its ability to deploy legions of soldiers, enslaved peoples, and skilled engineers to conquer nature itself. The soaring arches spanning a valley were a message as clear as any edict. They declared, "We command the very mountains and the rivers." The scale was the message. A bigger pyramid, a longer road, a more massive colosseum. These were not just feats of engineering. They were pure propaganda in stone and mortar, a calculated display of a ruler's reach and the sheer human resources he could summon at a whim. This relentless drive to build the impossible created the wonders we marvel at today, but it was fueled by a system where human life was often the most expendable material. The first great secret hidden within the stonework is the systematic erasure of identity. Look closely at the foundation stones of a medieval cathedral or the endless bricks of the Great Wall. You will not find the names of the people who placed them there. These workers formed an anonymous army, their individuality submerged beneath the weight of the collective task. In royal ledgers, they were not recorded as individuals with families and dreams. They were entries listed by their function. Quarryman number 7. Mortar mixer number 12. This was not an oversight, it was a deliberate policy. Guilds, while protecting trade secrets, also controlled the flow of prestige, and royal decrees often explicitly forbade artisans from signing their masterpieces. Why enforce such blanket anonymity? The answer is a stark lesson in power. A single, brilliant artist signing a fresco could claim a piece of the glory. But 1,000 nameless masons, they claimed nothing. Their silence ensured that all awe, all wonder flowed upward, reflecting only on the monarch who commanded it. The creation of an eternal monument required the dissolution of the creators themselves, making them faceless cogs in a machine designed to produce a single, immortal name. That is the poignant, heartbreaking testament etched into these walls, the first act of a struggle between the one who commands the dream and the many who are forbidden from owning any part of it. The empire's hunger for stone and timber created landscapes of relentless toil far from the finished palaces and temples. Deep within the marble quarries of Carrara, workers dangled from ropes on sheer cliff faces, their world reduced to the rhythmic strike of chisels against pristine white stone. Each block destined for a Roman forum began here. shaped by men who worked in constant peril from falling rock and collapsing ledges. In the cedar forests of ancient Lebanon, teams of loggers felled mighty trees for Phoenician ships and royal construction, their axes echoing through woods that stretched for miles. The felling was only the beginning. Moving a single massive timber or a multi-ton block of granite was a puzzle of physics and human endurance. Workers used rollers, ropes, and raw muscle to inch these colossal weights towards riverbanks or waiting ships. This was the brutal first link in the supply chain, a world defined by dust, splinters, and the ever-present risk of catastrophic accident. To fuel this machine, empires relied on two powerful and often cruel systems of labor. The first was corvée labor, a form of tax paid not in grain or coin, but in physical work. A farmer might be required to leave his fields for 30 days each year to haul stones for a pharaoh's tomb. While this was technically temporary service, it could mean abandoning his family at a critical harvest time, pushing them to the brink of starvation. The other system was outright slavery, the forced and permanent labor of conquered peoples. These individuals had no hope of return, their lives entirely consumed by the empire's projects. Think of the sheer scale of moving materials across hundreds of miles without modern machinery. How did they transport Egyptian obelisks down the Nile on reed boats? How did Roman engineers float massive stones across the Mediterranean? The answer always comes back to the same element, an immense and expendable human effort. Men strained at oars, pulled sledges across desert sands, and guided ox carts through mountain passes. They endured scorching heat and freezing cold, all to feed the distant building site they would likely never see completed. Every block of stone in a pyramid, every beam in a palace, carries the silent memory of this first brutal journey, a testament to the thousands who wrestled the raw materials of the earth into motion. But if you know where to look, the silence of these walls begins to speak. The second astonishing secret is that of coded messages in stone. Forbidden from signing their work openly, countless workers still found ingenious ways to etch their identities into the very monuments they were building. They left behind a hidden language of symbols, a silent rebellion against their enforced anonymity. The most common of these were the mason's marks. In the dim interiors of European cathedrals, on stones high up in the walls where only another worker might see them, you can find these small, chiseled signatures. A simple geometric shape, a unique combination of lines, a stylized tool. At first glance, they seem purely practical, a way for a guild to track which mason had cut which stone, ensuring he was paid for his labor. But look closer, these marks were more than just accounting. They were a claim of ownership, a declaration that said, "I was here, my hands shaped this." In a world that sought to render them invisible, this was a profound act of self-assertion. The drive to be remembered, however secretly, was irresistible. Sometimes this impulse turned mischievous, even defiant. In the hidden recesses of great buildings, tucked away in dark corners of roof spaces or on the backs of stones facing the wall, archaeologists have discovered something remarkable. There are caricatures, cleverly carved images mocking a harsh foreman or a demanding official. Imagine a stonecutter taking a moment of private satisfaction to scratch the face of a cruel overseer onto a block that would be sealed away forever. It was a small, safe act of revenge, a way to reclaim a sliver of power. In other places, we find quiet complaints, a few words or a simple drawing that speaks of blistered hands, aching backs, or meager rations. These were not meant for the eyes of kings. They were messages for their fellow workers, or perhaps for a future they could not imagine, a future where we would find them and finally hear their whispers. These clandestine marks are more than historical curiosities. They are a direct line to the human spirit behind the hammer and chisel. They prove that these builders were never truly silent. They were merely waiting for someone to listen. Far from the polished halls of power, a different kind of city was born. It sprawled in the shadow of the rising monument, a temporary, teeming world of tents, mud brick huts, and workshops. This was the construction camp, a society in microcosm built for one purpose only, to sustain the army of workers. Within its boundaries, a strict and visible hierarchy governed every aspect of life. At the top were the master architects and engineers, the men who could read the royal plans. They lived in relative comfort, their authority absolute. Beneath them were the skilled artisans, the stonemasons, carpenters, and metalworkers whose specialized knowledge commanded respect and better rations. And at the very bottom were the vast majority, the common laborers, the haulers, and the water carriers, who formed the human engine of the entire endeavor. Their daily existence was a precarious balance between grueling work and the struggle for survival. What did they eat? The answer reveals the cold calculus of empire. Workers were fuel, and they were given just enough to keep them burning. In ancient Egypt, excavations at the Giza Plateau workers' village uncovered evidence of a state-run bakery and a diet heavy in bread, fish, and beer, a calorie-rich ration designed for maximum physical output. But this was not generosity, it was logistics. A starving worker cannot move a 2-ton block of stone. In other camps, meals were a monotonous cycle of grain porridge and legumes, with meat a rare luxury, perhaps after a successful ox cart broke down and had to be butchered. In this pressure cooker environment, a hidden economy thrived. A skilled carpenter might barter a repaired tool handle for an extra loaf of bread from a baker whose oven he had fixed. A laborer with a talent for carving might fashion small bone amulets to trade for a better pair of sandals. This makeshift barter system was the real circulatory system of the camp, a web of personal deals and favors that existed entirely outside the official royal ledgers. Disputes were inevitable in such crowded, high-stress conditions. While major crimes fell under the jurisdiction of the royal overseers, smaller conflicts over stolen rations or contested sleeping spaces were often settled internally by respected elders or guild foremen who acted as judges, their word becoming the law of the camp. Children were not spared from this life. They were part of the workforce from a young age, carrying water to their fathers, sorting tools, or helping in the camp kitchens. The sounds of the camp were a constant mix of hammering, the shouts of foremen, the lowing of oxen, and the laughter and cries of children playing in the dust. Disease was a constant, terrifying specter, sweeping through the densely packed huts with devastating effect. An accident in the quarries could mean a family lost its sole provider in an instant. Yet, in the face of this hardship, profound camaraderie was forged. These men, women, and children, drawn from different villages and sometimes even different conquered lands, built their own community. They shared food, cared for each other's children, and developed their own slang, their own stories, their own secret culture. This temporary city, with all its squalor and its solidarity, was a complete society, a world built to build another world, and its every heartbeat was dedicated to the stone giant growing slowly beside it. The true strength of an empire was not just in its armies, but in the guarded minds of its master builders. This is the third astonishing secret, the power of specialized knowledge. The techniques used to create these wonders were not common property. They were closely held secrets passed from master to apprentice, often within the same family for generations. Think of Roman concrete, a revolutionary material that could set and harden even underwater, allowing for the construction of massive harbors and aqueducts. Its exact recipe was a state secret, a proprietary mix of lime, volcanic ash, and rock fragments that created a chemical reaction, resulting in a material stronger and more durable than anything we can easily produce today. This was not just a formula, it was strategic power. Similarly, the ability to align a temple or a pyramid with the rising sun on a solstice or a specific star required a profound understanding of astronomy and mathematics. This knowledge transformed a pile of stones into a cosmic clock, a connection between the earthly and the divine. The men who held this wisdom, the architects and the lead stonemasons, occupied a unique and powerful position. They were not anonymous laborers. Their names were sometimes recorded. Their expertise made them indispensable to the ruler. This gave them a rare form of leverage. A master builder could negotiate for higher pay, for better rations for his team, or for exemptions from other taxes. He could argue for a safer construction method, saving countless lives. But this power came with immense risk. Such a valuable individual could not simply walk away. He and his family were often effectively bound to the state, their freedom exchanged for their irreplaceable skills. If a project was too slow, or if a rival kingdom coveted his knowledge, a master craftsman could find himself and his entire guild threatened, imprisoned, or forced to work under duress. His mind was a treasure, and like any treasure, it made him a target. This system of orally transmitted, secret knowledge was both its greatest strength and its ultimate fragility. When an empire fell into decline, when wars disrupted the long apprenticeships, or when a guild line died out, that priceless wisdom could vanish in a single generation. The recipe for Roman concrete was lost for centuries. The precise methods for moving and erecting the massive stones at Stonehenge or the Moai statues of Easter Island are still subjects of intense debate. The loss of these techniques is a stark reminder that the greatest legacy of these workers was not just the stone they left behind, but the brilliant, fragile intellect that made it possible. Their silent walls hold not only their labor, but their genius, a final testament to the minds that truly built the world. The master craftsman's knowledge was power, but the empire's true weight fell upon the common laborer. Theirs was a world defined by the creak of ropes and the groan of wooden sledges, a life of relentless, backbreaking toil. Imagine the strain of moving a single stone for the pyramids, a block weighing more than 2 adult elephants. There were no cranes, no powerful engines. It was a battle of physics fought with ramps of mud brick, rollers made from felled trees, and an ocean of human muscle. Teams of men, sometimes 50 or more, would haul on thick ropes, their chants and shouts synchronizing their efforts as they inched the colossal weight forward. Every day was a marathon of lifting, pulling, and carrying, a constant test of endurance that pushed the human body far beyond its natural limits. The work did not stop at ground level. Reaching for the sky meant trusting your life to networks of wooden scaffolding lashed together high above the earth. A laborer balancing on a narrow platform, hauling a heavy bucket of mortar, faced a dizzying drop with every step. A sudden gust of wind, a frayed rope, or a single rotten plank could mean a fatal plunge. The air was thick with dust from cut stone and the ever-present risk of falling debris. This was not a job with minor hazards. It was a constant negotiation with death and dismemberment. We do not have to imagine the physical cost. The bones of these workers tell their own brutal story. Archaeologists studying skeletons from laborer cemeteries near the Giza Plateau and other ancient sites find a consistent, heartbreaking pattern. There is evidence of severe spinal arthritis, compressed vertebrae from years of carrying crushing loads, and shoulders deformed by the constant strain of pulling ropes. Healed fractures are common, suggesting accidents were a regular part of life. and many show signs of chronic infections that would have caused constant pain. These were not the bodies of old men. The average life expectancy for a common laborer on such a project was shockingly low, often only reaching their early 30s. Their bodies were quite literally worn down like a tool, consumed by the very process of construction. A master craftsman could hope for recognition, but the common laborer could only hope to survive the week. His payment was often just enough food to fuel another day of work, his legacy a skeleton scarred by the empire's ambition. While kings and pharaohs planned for eternity, the men in the dust were living day to day, their silent suffering measured not in coins or glory, but in the slow, grinding accumulation of broken bones and spent lives. This foundation of human endurance raises a haunting question. What happens when that endurance finally runs out? Yet the relentless pressure of the whip and the overseer's watchful eye could not extinguish the human will. This brings us to the fourth astonishing secret, the quiet war of sabotage and silent protest. Not all labor was given willingly, and resistance often flowed through the mortar, not the streets. This was the weapon of the weak, a subtle but deliberate campaign to reclaim a sliver of agency. Open rebellion was unthinkable and brutally punished, so workers found ingenious ways to voice their discontent through the work itself. Imagine a laborer ordered to mix mortar for a royal palace. In the interior walls, the ones that would be hidden behind plaster and paint, he might deliberately use a weaker mix, less lime, more sand. This would not cause the wall to collapse tomorrow, but it would ensure it crumbled just a little faster over the centuries. It was a delayed message of defiance, a flaw sewn into the very fabric of the empire's grandeur. Others might misalign a single stone by a fraction of an inch, a tiny error invisible to the eye but one that would subtly weaken the entire structure over generations. These were not acts of grand destruction, but of quiet, calculated erosion. Sometimes the protest was spiritual. Folklore and archaeological finds tell of workers burying objects within walls to curse the inhabitants. A worn-out sandal, a broken pot, or even animal bones were sealed inside, intended as a permanent blight on the house or the dynasty it represented. In some traditions, workers would entomb a personal tool, a hammer or a chisel, as a final act of spiritual defiance, a way of saying, "My spirit remains here, in this place you claim to own." These hidden acts were a profound psychological rebellion. They were a silent statement that even the most absolute monarch could not fully control the hands that built his legacy. Every slightly crooked stone, every patch of weak mortar, was a testament to a struggle that played out not on battlefields, but in the quiet, dusty moments between the hammer's blows. It was a way for the faceless to leave a fingerprint, not of creation, but of quiet, enduring resistance. The master architect stood at the nexus of an impossible equation. On one side was the pharaoh's dream of a perfect, eternal tomb, a structure to defy the desert sun. On the other was the brutal reality of logistics, the finite strength of thousands of men, and the stubborn weight of the earth itself. Figures like Imhotep in Egypt or the great Ottoman architect Sinan were more than just designers. They were the ultimate project managers, translators of divine ambition into earthly possibility. They had to be part artist, part general, and part accountant all at once. Their genius lay not only in their vision but in their ability to organize chaos, to calculate how many men it would take to move a specific obelisk, how much food to store for a 30-year project, and how to keep the entire fragile enterprise from collapsing under its own immense scale. This required a mind that could hold both the cosmic alignment of a pyramid and the daily bread ration for a hauling team in a single, seamless thought. But this position of power came with a profound moral weight. The same man who could innovate a safer pulley system to protect his workers could also, under pressure from an impatient sultan, enforce a deadly pace that broke them. He was the buffer between the royal whim and the human cost. When a king demanded a taller spire or a longer wall, the architect was the one who had to decide how to achieve it. Would he push the laborers for another hour under the scorching sun? Would he approve the use of a weaker, more easily quarried stone to meet a deadline, knowing it might compromise the structure's longevity? These were not abstract engineering choices. They were decisions that directly dictated the suffering or survival of the people in the camp. Their legacy is thus beautifully, painfully dual. We remember Sinan for the sublime elegance of his domes, masterpieces that seem to float above Istanbul. We revere Imhotep as the genius who conceived the first pyramid. Yet their names are also inextricably linked to the system that consumed countless anonymous lives. They were celebrated visionaries who walked a razor's edge, their greatness built upon a foundation of difficult and often morally ambiguous compromises. They served the dream of eternity, but they lived in the gritty, unforgiving world of the present, forever balancing the immortality of stone against the fleeting fragility of human breath. The very tools used to build could also become instruments of control. Royal authorities understood that a vast, discontented workforce was a powder keg waiting for a spark. To prevent this, they perfected a system of invisible oversight, the fifth astonishing secret, a royal spy network operating within the labor camps themselves. These informants were the invisible threads woven into the social fabric of the workers' city, their true allegiance hidden behind a facade of shared hardship. They were not always professional agents. Often they were fellow laborers, coerced into service with promises of extra rations, lighter duties, or protection for their families. A man facing starvation might agree to report on his tent mates, trading the trust of his companions for a full stomach. Their task was to listen, to blend in, and to report any whisper of discontent that threatened to coalesce into organized action. They monitored conversations around the campfires, noting who complained about the overseer, who spoke of demanding better pay, or who simply seemed to be gathering too many friends. The historical record offers chilling glimpses of this system in action. During the construction of the Palace of Versailles for the Sun King, Louis XIV, his ministers maintained meticulous reports not just on construction progress, but on the mood of the thousands of workers. They tracked rumors, documented grumbling, and identified potential ringleaders. This was not paranoia, it was a calculated strategy of power. The constant, low-grade fear of being reported created a climate of profound suspicion. How could you trust the man sharing your bread? How could you plan a collective slowdown when the person next to you might be trading your words for a reward? This atmosphere of watchfulness was more effective than any wall or guard post. It atomized the workforce, breaking the natural bonds of solidarity that could have led to collective bargaining or strikes. The very walls they were raising, symbols of absolute royal power, were being watched over by the invisible eyes of the crown, ensuring that no secret of rebellion could be shared, while every secret of the workers' suffering remained safely contained. This silent, psychological warfare ensured that the empire's monumental dreams were built on a foundation of controlled and isolated despair. While the royal spy network sowed suspicion among the men, a quieter, more resilient community sustained the camp itself. The story of these monumental walls is incomplete without the women and children who lived and labored in their long shadows. They were the invisible infrastructure holding the entire human enterprise together. Far from being passive, women were the camp's essential managers. They transformed raw grain into thousands of loaves of bread daily in massive communal ovens. a logistical feat that alone required military precision. They nursed the injured, using knowledge of local herbs to treat wounds and fevers, and they maintained the fragile social fabric, caring for each other's children when a mother fell ill or a father was killed in a quarry accident. Their work extended directly into the construction. In many cultures, women were responsible for preparing the materials that bound the stones. They mixed vast quantities of plaster and mortar, a task that was far from light, requiring them to stand for hours in pits, stirring caustic lime and sand with their bare feet or heavy paddles. They wove the enormous reed mats used to cushion sledges and protect finished stonework, their hands moving in a constant, rhythmic dance of creation and protection. Without their uncelebrated labor, the pace of construction would have ground to a halt. The children of the camp knew no other life. From the time they could walk steadily, they had a role to play. A boy of 5 or 6 would be tasked with carrying a small skin of water to his father, a vital errand in the blistering heat. A slightly older girl might help her mother sort stones for the plaster mix or tend a cooking fire. As they grew, so did their responsibilities. They became runners, carrying messages between the quarry and the building site, their small, nimble bodies darting through the crowded pathways. They were tool fetchers and apprentices, learning a trade not in a formal school, but by watching, fetching, and making small mistakes on blocks that would be hidden deep within the walls. This was not a childhood of play, it was a childhood of purpose, however grim. Their small, growing bodies were already being shaped for a lifetime of labor, their bones developing under the same strains that broke their elders. To see the camp through their eyes is to see the most heartbreaking picture of all. It was a world where a child's value was measured in the number of water jars they could carry, and where the concept of home was a dusty tent in the shadow of an eternal stone giant. They were born into a project meant to outlast civilizations, their own fleeting youth spent in service of a forever they would never see. Beyond the dust and the physical strain lay a world of hidden formulas and whispered rituals. The 6th astonishing secret reveals the builder's descent into alchemy and esoteric rites, a realm where chemistry blurred into magic in the desperate pursuit of perfection. When a king demanded a pigment of unparalleled brilliance for his throne room, or a concrete that could defy the sea itself, the artisans had no textbooks to consult. They had only experimentation, folklore, and the belief that the natural world held secrets waiting to be unlocked by the worthy. This was not mere superstition, it was proto-science born of necessity. In smoky, makeshift workshops, these craftsmen became early chemists, heating minerals and mixing strange compounds in clay pots. They sought the formula for a royal purple dye that would not fade, a process so guarded that the knowledge itself was worth more than gold. They experimented with mercury to create dazzling reflective surfaces, unaware they were poisoning themselves in the process. The quest for durable, vibrant colors led them to pulverize precious stones like lapis lazuli for ultramarine blue, a color so costly it was reserved for the robes of the divine. Each successful experiment was a small miracle, a piece of captured light and permanence that elevated their work from construction to creation. But the mystical pursuits went far beyond mere materials. The very design of sacred structures was often governed by sacred geometry and numerology. The precise ratios used to determine the height of a cathedral spire or the width of a temple's entrance were not arbitrary. They were believed to be divine proportions, mathematical relationships that mirrored the harmony of the cosmos itself. By building according to these principles, the masons thought they were infusing the stone with spiritual power, creating a bridge between the earthly and the heavenly. This knowledge was the most closely guarded secret of all, often contained in a single hand-copied book kept by the master of a mason's guild. This book was not just a set of instructions, it was a sacred text passed from master to chosen apprentice in a solemn ceremony. To possess it was to hold the key to building not just a wall, but a doorway to the gods. This blending of rigorous craftsmanship with mystical belief highlights a profound truth about these workers. They were not just laborers, they were seekers. Faced with impossible demands, they reached into the very frontiers of human knowledge, willing to dabble in the forbidden if it meant achieving the transcendent. Their legacy is not only in the stone that remains, but in the ghost of that lost knowledge, the lingering question of what other secrets they discovered that were too powerful or too dangerous to be written down. The alchemist's quest for perfect pigments and the master mason's sacred geometry existed alongside a brutal, daily lottery of life and death. For every secret formula discovered, there was a simple, fatal slip. The magnificent heights of a Gothic cathedral were not just a testament to faith, but to a chillingly high body count. Workers balanced on narrow wooden scaffolds hundreds of feet in the air, with only a prayer between them and a fatal plunge. A sudden storm, a frayed rope, or a single misstep could send a man tumbling through the air, his life ending on the stones he was meant to be raising. The records from the building of Beauvais Cathedral in France are stark, detailing multiple catastrophic collapses as the builders pushed the limits of engineering. In one such event, the entire choir vault came crashing down, burying workers and their tools in an avalanche of stone and shattered ambition. These were not isolated incidents. They were an expected, if tragic, part of the process. Medical care was almost non-existent. A laborer who fell and broke his leg would likely never walk properly again, his earning power shattered along with his bones. An infection from a simple cut could fester into a deadly fever with nothing but poultices and prayers to fight it. There was no workers' compensation, no safety net. If a father died on the job, his family was often cast out of the camp, left to beg or starve. The official royal ledgers tell a cold, sanitized version of these events. They might note a delay in construction due to an accident, but they never listed the names of the dead. The human cost was a line item, an acceptable loss in the grand accounting of empire. So when you stand before one of these ancient, soaring structures, look beyond the grandeur, see the slight unevenness in the stonework, perhaps where a new team had to take over after a fatal accident. Feel the coolness of the interior, a space that holds the echoes of countless final breaths. Every majestic dome and every towering spire is in part a silent memorial, built not just with stone and mortar, but with sacrifice and unmarked graves. The official rations were never enough. Beneath the rigid surface of the royal worksite, a second, vital economy pulsed with life. A hidden network of barter and favor that kept the human machine from breaking down. This is the seventh astonishing secret, the shadow economy of survival. While kings accounted for stone and timber in precise ledgers, they could never fully account for the human need for a little extra bread, a less dangerous job, or a moment of mercy. A master stonemason, for instance, held a power that the royal overseer did not. He could carve a beautiful personal seal for the commissary officer, the man who controlled the food stores. In return, that officer might look the other way when the mason's crew received an extra sack of grain. It was a silent transaction, a trade of skill for sustenance that never appeared on any official scroll. A common laborer, strong and reliable, might offer to repair the foreman's personal cart on his own time. This small act of service could be exchanged for a priceless commodity, a transfer to a work team farther from the perilous quarry edge. This was not corruption in the modern sense. It was the essential grease for the empire's grinding gears. These intricate deals created a web of mutual obligation that cut across the formal hierarchy. The blacksmith depended on the baker for a larger loaf. The baker needed the blacksmith to fix his oven, and the water carrier who overheard a crucial piece of gossip could trade that information to either group for a pair of sturdy sandals. This system demonstrated a profound ingenuity. With no official currency for these personal needs, workers created their own, using the only things they truly owned: their skills, their labor, and their silence. It was a quiet rebellion against absolute control, a way to carve out small pockets of autonomy and comfort within a system designed to render them utterly dependent. Every extra loaf of bread, every safer assignment, was a victory won not through protest, but through a whispered deal and a handshake in the dust. This hidden economy proved that even in the most oppressive conditions, human connection and resourcefulness could forge a path to a slightly more bearable life. The supply lines feeding a royal worksite were the empire's true lifeline, a river of grain and goods that had to flow without interruption. Imagine the sheer volume required to feed 20,000 workers, a city of hungry mouths that needed filling every single day. This was not a simple matter of delivering a few wagon loads of food. It was a logistical puzzle on a staggering scale, a constant, silent battle against spoilage and distance. The grain itself was a form of currency, harvested from royal estates and collected as taxes from farmers across the kingdom. It traveled for weeks on ox carts and river barges, a slow-moving caravan destined for the construction camp. Upon arrival, this river of grain was processed with military efficiency. Vast, state-run bakeries operated around the clock, their massive clay ovens producing thousands of identical, dense loaves of bread. The smell of baking bread would have been the defining scent of the camp, a cruel and constant reminder of the thin line between sustenance and starvation. But bread alone was not enough to fuel such immense physical labor. Records from ancient Egypt show workers also received a daily ration of fish from the Nile, onions, and beer, which was not a luxury but a safe, nutritious drink in a world of questionable water. For Roman legions building a frontier wall, the ration might include lentils, olive oil, and a measure of sour wine. This was cold, practical calculus. A malnourished worker could not haul a 2-ton block of stone. The system was designed for maximum output, not compassion, and it was terrifyingly fragile. A single failed harvest in a breadbasket province, a rebellion that disrupted a trade route, or a spring drought that left river barges stranded could snap that lifeline in an instant. When the supply train stopped, the consequences were immediate and brutal. The rhythm of construction would falter as hunger weakened the workforce. Whispers of discontent would grow into open panic. A delayed grain shipment was not just an administrative headache, it was a direct threat to the stability of the entire project and the power of the king who commanded it. The true foundation of these stone wonders was not just rock and mortar, but the relentless, unsung work of counting, moving, and baking enough bread to keep the abyss of famine at bay for one more day. A lifetime of labor could vanish into a single stone in a wall you would never see finished. This is the 8th astonishing secret, a psychological burden as heavy as any block of granite. Beyond the broken bones and blistered hands lay a more insidious enemy, a deep and corrosive despair. Imagine the perspective of a young stonemason arriving at the worksite. He is told the project will take 80 years. He knows with absolute certainty that he will die long before the final capstone is set. His entire life's work, all his skill and sweat, will be just one anonymous layer in a foundation for a future he cannot share. This created a profound alienation, a sense that your own existence was merely fuel for a machine building toward a destination you were forbidden to reach. Time itself became fractured. Your own short, difficult life was measured against the chilling scale of eternity. This existential weight found its voice not in protest, but in melancholy. Across cultures, the folk tales and work songs born from these sites are steeped in a specific, haunting sorrow. There are ballads of wives waiting in vain for husbands who vanished into the quarries, their names forgotten by the overseers. There are stories of ghostly figures seen high on the scaffolds, forever repeating the motions of their unfinished tasks. These were not just ghost stories. They were expressions of a collective grief, a way for a community to process the feeling of being consumed by something too vast to comprehend. The grand vision of a pharaoh or an emperor was a crushing abstraction for the man mixing mortar in the dust. He did not see a glorious tomb or a divine symbol. He saw an endless demand for more stone, more labor, more years of his life. This psychological warfare was perhaps the most effective control mechanism of all. A man grappling with the futility of his own existence is far less likely to organize a rebellion. His spirit, as well as his body, was being systematically worn down. When we look at these eternal structures today, we see their majesty, but to truly understand the cost, we must also hear the echo of that quiet, relentless despair, the silent eighth secret buried deep within the mortar, a testament to the human spirit's struggle against the crushing weight of forever. The stones could not speak, but the workers could still sing. In the firelight after a brutal day, their voices rose in a collective act of remembrance and defiance. This rich oral culture of folklore and song became the ninth astonishing secret, a living archive where their true history was preserved. Official records erased them, but around the cooking fires and in the cramped huts, they wove their experiences into ballads and stories, passing them from one generation of laborers to the next. The rhythm of their work gave birth to work songs, a powerful tool for both coordination and endurance. On chain gangs or in teams hauling massive stones, the call and response of a leader and the chorus kept movements synchronized, turning individual strain into a shared rhythmic effort. The song did more than just set the pace. It distracted the mind from agony, it measured the passing of the day, and it transformed a scene of back-breaking toil into a moment of fleeting communal power. These songs often contained hidden layers of meaning. A lyric that seemed to be about a bird flying free might be a coded lament for a worker who had escaped, or a quiet prayer for their own deliverance. The ballads of medieval masons celebrated heroes from their own ranks, not kings or saints. They sang of the carpenter who outwitted a cruel overseer, or the mason whose skill was so great he could set a stone that would sing when the wind blew through it. These were more than just stories. They were a way of asserting their own value, creating a pantheon of working-class heroes whose fame existed entirely outside the royal court. Cautionary tales served as both entertainment and vital social instruction. A popular story might warn of a greedy foreman who was punished by spirits for stealing rations, a clear message about the consequences of abuse within their community. They mocked the powerful through clever allegory, laughing at a foolish king or a vain official in the safety of a fictional tale. This vibrant, underground culture was their true legacy, a testament to an unbreakable spirit. Their individual names may have been lost to the quarry dust, but their collective voice, carried on the melody of a forgotten song, echoes through the centuries, refusing to be silenced. Even the most ambitious imperial dream could shatter in an instant. The ninth astonishing secret is the royal panic and the sudden, chaotic abandonment of a project. While we remember the triumphs, history is also littered with half-finished palaces and crumbling fortress walls, silent witnesses to the fragility of absolute power. A king's death could plunge a court into a succession crisis, with the new ruler immediately cancelling his predecessor's vanity project to fund his own. A distant war might drain the treasury, forcing a choice between an army and an aqueduct. A series of poor harvests could snap the delicate supply lines, leaving 20,000 workers with no bread and a mountain of unpaid stone. When the royal order came to halt construction, it was not a gentle wind down. It was a sudden collapse. Overseers simply stopped issuing rations. The rhythm of hammers ceased. Thousands of laborers who had dedicated years of their lives to this single purpose found themselves cast adrift in an instant. They were owed weeks, sometimes months, of back wages, promises etched only in dust. With no money and often far from their ancestral homes, they faced a desperate journey back to villages that may have forgotten them, or a life of begging on the roads. The archaeological evidence at these abandoned sites is hauntingly vivid. At some unfinished Ming Dynasty tombs, you can see stones that were cut and dressed but never moved from the quarry, waiting for a hauling team that never returned. In the skeletons of medieval castles across Europe, you find carpenters' tool marks frozen on beams that were never fitted, and masons' scaffolds still braced against walls that never reached their intended height. In the workers' camps, archaeologists uncover the most poignant clues of all. A single, worn-out leather shoe left behind in a hurried departure, a cooking pot still sitting in the ashes of a hearth, its last meal never eaten. These are not the planned burials of a ritual. They are moments of everyday life interrupted by a royal decree, a snapshot of panic preserved for centuries. These abandoned sites tell a different story from the completed wonders. They reveal the precariousness of the entire enterprise, a system that could be switched off as abruptly as it was switched on. The grand vision of eternity was always just one bad harvest, one lost battle, or one royal heartbeat away from becoming a field of ghosts and forgotten dreams. The empires of stone and marble were built upon landscapes of permanent scars. Beyond the human toll, the earth itself bore the marks of this relentless ambition, an environmental legacy etched into hillsides and riverbeds. The demand for raw materials was insatiable. To build a single Roman city required entire forests to be felled for scaffolding, heating, and the charcoal needed to fire countless roof tiles. The famous cedar woods of Lebanon, once so dense they darkened the sky, were steadily stripped for Phoenician ships and royal palaces, leaving behind eroded slopes that could no longer hold the soil. This was not a matter of using resources, it was a system of consumption on a scale the world had rarely seen. Vast quarries, like gaping wounds in the earth, were carved out of mountainsides. The beautiful white marble of Carrara, prized by emperors, was extracted at a staggering cost to the local environment, with rubble and dust choking nearby streams and altering watersheds for centuries. The hunt for metals to make tools and adornments led to primitive but devastating mining operations. Rivers downstream from ancient gold mines in places like Spain still carry traces of mercury and other toxins used to process the ore, a poison that has flowed for 2,000 years. The land was not just a source of materials, it was an obstacle to be conquered. Swamps were drained to build foundations, hills were leveled to create parade grounds, and natural springs were diverted into complex aqueducts, often leaving former wetlands barren. This reshaping of the terrain had profound and unintended consequences for local agriculture. A deforested hillside would wash its topsoil into the valley below during the first heavy rain, smothering fertile fields in mud and stone. A diverted river might leave a once lush plain a dusty wasteland, forcing farmers who supplied the very workers to abandon their ancestral lands. The empire's footprint was not just architectural, it was ecological. Every stone in a royal wall represents a missing tree, a polluted stream, a hillside stripped bare. This silent, slow-moving catastrophe reveals the final, chilling cost of these eternal monuments. They were not merely built from the earth, they were built at its expense, leaving a planet fundamentally altered by the drive to build forever. The last stone set in place did not mean the story ended for the hands that placed it. The final, astonishing secret is the afterlife of the builders themselves, a tale of dispersal and quiet reinvention that flowed from the silent walls back into the world. When the final ceremony was over and the last royal procession had passed through the gates, the great machine of labor had to be dismantled. What happened next to the thousands of men, women, and children who had been the lifeblood of the project depended entirely on their status. The most fortunate were the master craftsmen and the skilled artisans. Their rare talents guaranteed them a future. They might be retained for the endless work of maintaining the structure they had just built, repairing wear and weathering, a permanent staff for an eternal monument. Or, more likely, they were immediately reassigned to the next grand project, their expertise transferred from a finished temple to a new royal tomb or a fortress on a distant frontier. Their lives became a cycle of construction, moving from one worksite to the next, their identity forever linked to their guild and their irreplaceable skills. For the vast army of common laborers, however, the end of work brought profound uncertainty. Many were simply disbanded. Given a final, meager ration, they were turned out from the camp gates to find their own way home. This journey itself was a perilous undertaking. A man who had spent 10 years hauling stone might return to his village to find his plot of land taken by a relative, his family gone, or his old farming skills rusted from disuse. Some never made it home, succumbing to illness or bandits on the road. Others, with no home to return to, became itinerant laborers, selling their muscle and their hard-won knowledge of construction to whatever town or lord needed a wall repaired or a bridge built. They carried the secrets of imperial engineering with them, spreading techniques across the countryside in a slow, human diffusion of knowledge. For the enslaved, there was rarely any freedom at the end. Their bodies were a permanent investment. Upon the completion of one colosseum, they were herded onto carts and marched to the next, their lives an unbroken chain of forced labor until age, injury, or disease finally broke them. In some rare, dark instances, workers who possessed knowledge of a tomb's hidden passages or a palace's secret chambers were silenced permanently, their lives sacrificed to protect the royal secrets they had helped to create. Yet from this dispersal, new communities were sometimes born. Groups of discharged soldiers and laborers who had served together on a distant wall would often settle nearby, forging a new collective identity rooted in their shared, monumental experience. They became the guardians of the very structure they built, their personal histories now forever intertwined with its stones. So the next time you walk through the echoing hall of a great cathedral or stand in the shadow of an ancient pyramid, remember that its legacy did not stop at the walls. The people who built it flowed outwards like a river, carrying their memories, their skills, and their silent stories back into the world, leaving an invisible human echo that still lingers in the air around us. The geometry of power began with a single line on a master plan. These architectural blueprints were far more than construction guides. They were dense symbolic texts, carefully engineered to enforce a rigid social hierarchy from the very first stone. The most pervasive symbol was the axial plan, a design principle that dominated royal palaces and temples across the ancient world. Imagine a long, straight corridor or a series of courtyards leading directly to the throne room or the inner sanctum. This was not an accident of design. It was a deliberate psychological tool. A visitor, whether a foreign ambassador or a lowly petitioner, was forced to walk this single, unbending path. With every step, they passed through increasingly grand gates, under the watchful eyes of guards stationed in strategic niches. The journey was a slow, humbling procession designed to amplify the power of the figure waiting at the end. By the time the visitor reached the throne, the architecture itself had conditioned them for submission. The worker tasked with building this axis understood its purpose intimately. He was the one carving the gateways that loomed over everyone, crafting the imposing columns that made a person feel small. He was literally constructing the very system that reinforced his own lowly status. The materials themselves spoke a clear language of exclusion. There was often a royal stone, a specific type of marble or granite reserved solely for the monarch's chambers or the statues of gods. A common laborer could quarry it, haul it, and shape it, but he was forbidden from ever using it for his own home. His hands worked with precious materials that symbolized a world he could never enter. Reading these plans was therefore an exercise in social navigation. The master mason interpreting the scrolls for his team was not just translating measurements. He was decoding a map of power, understanding that a slightly different carving on a capital or a specific type of floor tile denoted a space for nobility versus a space for servants. The workers were building a world where every architectural choice, from the width of a hallway to the height of a ceiling, whispered a constant reminder of their designated place. They raised magnificent structures that celebrated a hierarchy which kept them at the bottom, a profound contradiction etched into the foundation of every empire. The stones of ancient empires have their direct descendants in the steel and glass of our modern skylines. The same fundamental dynamics that governed the worker at Giza are at play today on a high-rise construction site. The crane operator guiding a steel beam into place, the migrant laborer laying bricks for a sprawling tech campus, the delivery driver racing against an algorithm to supply a digital empire. They are the contemporary army building our monuments. They too face the silent struggles of the anonymous workforce, from wage theft and unsafe working conditions to the psychological toll of being an invisible cog in a vast, impersonal machine. The historical pattern is unmistakable, where human labor is treated as the most expendable resource in the pursuit of monumental achievement. We have simply swapped the quarry for the warehouse, the royal foreman for the unyielding performance metric. The fight for a living wage, for safe working conditions, and for basic recognition is the same quiet war fought with different tools. Knowing this long history of exploitation and silent resistance changes our perspective. It forces us to see the modern landscape not just as a collection of buildings and services, but as the product of countless individual efforts, many of which remain undervalued and unseen. The whispers from the ancient mortar are a call to action, urging us to look closer at the human cost of our own progress and to demand dignity and justice for the hands that build our world today. Their forgotten legacy challenges us to ensure that the builders of our modern empires are not silenced by history, but are honored as the essential architects of our shared future. Even with all we have uncovered, the story is far from complete. The silent walls still guard profound mysteries that defy our modern understanding. How did workers in ancient Lebanon move the colossal stones of Baalbek, monoliths weighing over 1,000 tons across miles of rugged terrain? We can theorize about ramps and rollers, but the precise orchestration of manpower and engineering remains a breathtaking puzzle. And what was the true human cost of a monument to love like the Taj Mahal? Official records are silent, but the sheer scale and 20-year construction timeline suggest a staggering, unrecorded mortality rate, a hidden toll of lives consumed by beauty. Perhaps the most tantalizing questions lie just beneath the sand. Are there still undiscovered worker settlements, entire villages buried near the foundations of the Great Wall or along the Nile, waiting to reveal the intimate details of their daily existence through a forgotten cooking pot or a child's toy. The search for their final resting places continues, as these builders were often buried in humble, unmarked graves far from the grand tombs they constructed for their rulers. These are not just academic curiosities, they are the missing pieces of a vast human story. Every unanswered question is a testament to the limits of our knowledge and a beacon for the ongoing quest. History is not a sealed archive, but a living, breathing investigation. The secrets of the royal walls have not all been surrendered, and the whispers of the workers are still carried on the wind, waiting for the right moment to be heard. The final secret is not etched in stone, but in our own perspective. We have walked in the dust of their camps and heard the whispers they left in the mortar. These millions of forgotten souls, whose names were erased from the royal ledgers, have finally been given a voice. Their hidden marks were a declaration of existence. Their quiet sabotage was a claim to agency. Their work songs were an anthem of endurance. The gleaming palaces and mighty fortresses that have captivated us for centuries are not merely monuments to the power of kings and queens. They are, more profoundly, enduring testaments to the human capacity for resilience, ingenuity, and unbreakable spirit in the face of overwhelming force. They built the symbols of their own subjugation, yet they found countless ways to imprint their humanity upon them. So the next time you stand before an ancient wonder, let your eyes travel beyond the grandeur of the arch or the perfection of the spire. Look instead at the texture of the stone, the space between the blocks, the slight imperfections that reveal the hand of the maker. See the humanity etched into every surface. We invite you to share your thoughts on these unsung heroes in the comments below, and to join us as we continue to uncover the hidden layers of our shared past.